They fired me and thought it was over. They forgot who built it first. The boardroom ambush. I gave everything to Arledge & Co. Not just my time or effort, but the best years of my life. 10 years of working from dusk till dawn, building partnerships, managing crises, closing deals that no one else could close. It wasn't just a job, it was how I earned my place in the family, or so I thought. When Raymond Arledge, Lena's father, asked me to join the company shortly after our wedding, I took it as a sign of trust. He was aging sharp still, but no longer interested in fighting on the front lines. "You've got vision," he told me, clapping me on the back. "And more importantly, Lena believes in you." That's good enough for me. So I stepped in not just as a son-in-law, but as someone determined to build something that mattered. I still remember the first deal I brought in, a struggling logistics firm out of Chicago. Everyone laughed at the idea, Vivian especially. "You want to throw our money at sinking ships?" she sneered in front of the board. But that deal tripled in value over the next 3 years. No one laughed after that, except maybe they just hid it better. The morning it all unraveled, the air had a strange stillness to it, the kind you feel just before a storm. I was invited to a strategic alignment meeting, a phrase I'd heard countless times. I packed my usual documents, Q1 projections, new client pitches, updated logistics models, numbers, proof. I walked into the boardroom expecting business. What I got was betrayal. Vivian was already seated at the head of the table, a self-satisfied smirk playing at the edge of her lips. Lena sat beside her, eyes avoiding mine, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Something was off. Ethan Vivian began, not even pretending to ease into it. "As of this morning, we voted to restructure executive leadership. Your services are no longer required. No longer required." I stood there for a second, unsure if I'd misheard her. I looked at Lena, my wife, my partner, the woman who used to wait up for me after every late-night pitch, who once said, "I don't care how successful we are, just promise we stay in it together." That Lena was gone. This one didn't say a word. Vivian pushed a file across the table. "Severance details. We'll have your personal items boxed and delivered." I stared at the folder, then at the woman who once whispered that my drive inspired her. The woman who'd now joined her sister in cutting me loose like dead weight. "Okay," I said quietly, folding my hands. "Good luck." I walked out with my head high, even as the hallway blurred around me. At home, the silence screamed. Lena didn't come back that night, probably still at her sister's, celebrating their clean break. I sat in the dark, the TV off, the untouched glass of bourbon sweating beside me. My fingers tapped restlessly on the table, echoing the boardroom. Her silence, the look in her eyes. My phone buzzed around midnight. A text from Jonah, the company's former CFO and one of the few people I trusted there. They didn't check the subsidiary clause, did they? That line hit like a thunderclap. I sat upright. "What clause?" He replied a minute later. "Remember Eastbridge Tech. The acquisition in 2018. You're still co-chair. Read page 22. I ran to my home office, tore open the dusty drawer where I kept our older M&A files. My hands were shaking, not from hope, but something sharper. Rage, no. This was clarity. There it was. Eastbridge Technologies LLC, a minor holding company at the time. But that holding company controlled 92% of Arledge & Company's proprietary patents, software, client IP, licenses. And there it was in black ink, Ethan Callahan, co-chairman of Eastbridge Technologies, with sole discretionary authority over all intellectual property rights. They hadn't read it, they hadn't seen it, or worse, they had and thought I wouldn't. They fired me. But they forgot who built the damn foundation. The clause they didn't read. The morning after Ethan was fired, the house was unbearably quiet. The kind of silence that doesn't just hum in the air, it presses against your ribs and fills the space between thoughts. He sat at the kitchen island, a mug of black coffee growing cold between his fingers. Across the marble surface was Lena's untouched journal. She'd always been meticulous about keeping her notes, her vision, her 5-year strategy. Ethan stared at the embossed initials on the cover like they belonged to a stranger. Vivian had called him replaceable. Lena hadn't said a word. That part stung the most. His phone buzzed once, an old colleague, Jenna, who worked in legal. The message read, "Check your original merger file. Page 22, you'll want to see it." It didn't say more. Didn't have to. Ethan's breath caught for just a moment. Then instinct kicked in. He left the coffee to go cold and rushed to his home office, a space he hadn't touched in months. Dust on the desk, but the drawers were still locked. He found the thick black binder marked Merger, 2018, and yanked it free from a pile of marketing reports and R&D projections. He'd built the merger terms himself, line by line, when Elias, Lena, and Vivian's father still ran Halcyon Lux. Elias had called it the company's future. Ethan had called it a promise. He flipped through page after page, memories bleeding through every clause. A sales agreement here, a confidentiality paragraph there. Until finally, page 22. There it was. Clause 6.3, retained authority rights. Upon any transfer of executive ownership, existing co-chairpersons of subsidiary IP holdings shall retain sole signatory rights unless otherwise superseded in writing by full board majority consensus. Ethan's name was listed, in bold. No superseding document had ever been created. His mouth went dry. The clause had been buried deep in a joint venture agreement, part of a patent consolidation deal Halcyon Lux had made with a German firm 5 years ago. Ethan had co-authored that agreement with Elias. Back then, it was just strategy protecting the firm's innovations through a shell IP holding company that owned every trademark, every patent, every licensing deal. Now it was leverage. Lena and Vivian had fired him from Halcyon Lux. Yes, but the IP rights that powered the company's revenue stream still passed through the holding company. And Ethan. He was still its legal signatory. They hadn't read page 22. He sat back in his chair, the document trembling slightly in his grip. Not from rage, not even from satisfaction, but from the heavy realization that for the first time in a month, the power dynamics had shifted and they didn't even know it. He picked up the phone. "Jenna," she answered on the second ring. "I figured you'd call. Why didn't you say anything sooner? I wasn't sure you were ready to fight. But I've got copies of all the IP filings. You're still the name on every one. I need everything. You'll have it by this afternoon." Ethan leaned back, exhaling for what felt like the first time in 24 hours. This wasn't about getting revenge. It wasn't even about winning. It was about showing them they couldn't erase him from what he built. That afternoon, Ethan went into town for the first time since the firing. He walked into an old lawyer friend's office. George Merriweather, retired but sharp as ever, a legend in contract law. Ethan laid out the documents in silence. When George reached page 22, he looked up and whistled. "Well, now this is interesting. Can they reverse it?" Ethan asked. "Only if you agree to it. And if you don't, well, let's just say Halcyon Lux is going to hit a wall very soon." George leaned in, tapping the clause. "You know, most people never even notice this kind of thing. But Elias knew what he was doing. He protected the IP arm from corporate infighting. He trusted you." Ethan nodded. "And Lena and Vivian just fired the only person keeping that engine running." They sat in silence for a moment before George added, "You know they'll come crawling back. Question is, what do you want when they do?" Ethan didn't have an answer yet, not a clear one. But one thing was already forming: he wasn't walking back into that building with his head bowed. If he returned, it would be because the company needed him, not because he needed the company. At Halcyon Lux headquarters, chaos was unfolding. Lena had assumed the transition would be smooth. She and Vivian had called it a necessary evolution. But within 2 days, 3 major licensing approvals hit a wall. Overseas partners couldn't process shipments. The company's biggest software deployment, a digital product they'd spent 18 months developing, was stalled pending IP verification. Vivian slammed her palm on the conference table. "Why are the sign-offs still bouncing?" "We're getting error flags on the trademark." "Back end," muttered Alan, their head of compliance. "We've run it twice. Every document that routes through the IP holding server is frozen." "Who's the signatory on those?" Lena asked, her voice suddenly too quiet. Alan blinked. "Still says Ethan Caldwell." The silence that followed was absolute. Vivian stood so fast her chair scraped against the floor. "You're telling me we fired the one guy whose name is on every damn license agreement?" "It was in the merger file," Alan said helplessly. Page 22. Lena felt her stomach drop. Back at home, Ethan received the first email that evening, a carefully worded note from a Halcyon Lux board member. The subject line, "Urgent, IP rights discussion." He didn't reply. The next was a text from Lena. "Lena, can we talk? I think we all acted in the heat of the moment." He didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, he walked outside with a whiskey in hand, sat on the porch swing Elias had helped him build years ago, and watched the sun slip below the horizon. They had made their move. Now it was his turn. The price of silence. I kept my mouth shut. While Elena and Tasha paraded through the office in their new power suits, gloating behind closed doors and sipping champagne in what used to be my conference room, I stayed silent, and I let them think they'd won. The boardroom was theirs now, at least. That's what they believed. What they didn't know was that I had already begun writing the blueprint for their unraveling. After my exit, the days blurred. I didn't shave. I didn't answer texts from old colleagues. The house was quiet except for the occasional flicker of the news on TV or the hiss of my espresso machine. I told myself it was temporary, a pause. But really I was watching, listening, studying every move from the outside, waiting for the first crack in their armor. It came faster than I expected. 3 days after they let me go, I received a voicemail from one of our biggest suppliers, Denton Materials. Jacob Denton had been a friend before he was a business partner, and he sounded confused, even anxious. "Hey Mason, I got your wife and her sister calling me about renewing the shipping agreement. But weren't you the only one authorized to sign those contracts? Call me back, man. Something feels off." I paused the message and stared out the window. Denton was right. Under the strategic licensing deal I'd signed 2 years ago, I was the only authorized signatory for any vendor relationships over $500,000. Elena and Tasha hadn't read the fine print. Or worse, they had and thought they could bully through it. I called Jacob back. We met at a cafe downtown the next morning. Jacob was the kind of man who always wore the same navy windbreaker no matter the weather. His handshake was firm, his voice low. "I don't know what the hell's going on at Vervain, but something feels wrong," he said, sipping his burnt coffee. "They're scrambling, calling all our reps, changing timelines, trying to renegotiate without the clause even being addressed." I didn't smile. I just nodded. "They fired me," I said, watching his reaction. "Thought it'd be easy, clean. But they forgot who set up that deal in the first place." Jacob leaned back. "You're telling me they let go the only person who can legally execute our agreement? I am." He whistled. "Well then, you want me to play dumb until they hang themselves?" "No," I said. "I want you to stay the course. Just don't budge without my signature. That's all I ask. Done." That afternoon, I pulled out a thick black binder from the storage shelf in my home office. It was labeled Foundations. It held every critical contract I'd ever drafted, reviewed, or amended since the day I stepped into Vervain as the third co-founder. Though the media had always painted the company as the Peterson sisters' brainchild, the truth was far less glossy. They had the name. I had the grind. While they curated aesthetics and posted Instagram-worthy photos of our product lines, I was negotiating patents, managing distribution chains, and solidifying deals behind the scenes. One page caught my eye. It was a clause from the 2018 equity restructuring, something we all signed after Elena and I got married. My lawyer, a meticulous guy named Benji, had insisted we include it. In the event that Mason Fox is removed from his executive position without cause, all pending equity transfers and revenue shares related to licensed divisions will revert to their pre-marriage structure, effectively reinstating Mason as controlling stakeholder over Vervain Labs LLC. They didn't just fire me. They potentially gave me back a company within the company. Vervain Labs had started as a small R&D unit, but after 3 years of growth, it now housed all the proprietary formulas and digital automation processes, the heart of the operation. It was the one branch Elena had never taken seriously. Too technical, she'd said. Too dry. Well, it wasn't dry anymore. It was leverage. And it was mine. I called Benji that evening. "You're gonna love this," I said, reading the clause aloud. "Holy," he muttered. "They didn't get this reviewed. If they did, they didn't understand it. Mason, we can file for reinstatement. Take this public if we want to." "Not yet," I replied. "Let them squirm a little longer." The silence was starting to get to them. I could feel it. Over the next week, I received 2 emails from Tasha, both vaguely polite, asking if we could have a conversation and clear the air. I ignored them. Then came a text from Elena. "I miss you. Can we talk?" I didn't reply. The next morning, Vervain's PR lead, someone I'd hired straight out of grad school, sent me a LinkedIn message. "Hey, I know I'm not supposed to reach out, but they're making weird calls in the office. Shutting down the lab's budget. Clients are backing out. Everyone's scared. Are you okay?" I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to scream back, "No, I'm not okay. I gave this company 10 years and they tried to delete me like an old photo." But I didn't. Instead, I replied, "Tell the team to hold tight. Something better is coming." Because it was. Benji had already started drafting the legal notices. A reinstatement petition. a cease and desist order regarding the use of my digital workflow tools, and most importantly, a press release carefully worded to not start a war, but to signal a shift. By the time Elena called again, I was ready. I picked up on the third ring. "Mason," she breathed. "Thank God. I've been trying to—" "You made your bed," I interrupted. "I just hope you know how to sleep in it." There was a pause. "You're really going to let it fall apart?" I let that sit in the air like a challenge. "I didn't start this, Elena, but I will finish it." She started to cry. Or maybe she just wanted me to think she was crying. But the part of me that used to care, that part was quiet now. Because sometimes silence isn't weakness. Sometimes silence is strategy. Sometimes silence is the price of watching everything burn so you can rebuild it better. I didn't sleep much that night. The silence in our apartment was louder than ever. No TV humming in the background. No sounds of Valerie tossing her keys on the counter. No half-hearted, "Hey babe," like we used to exchange even on bad days. Just silence. And under it all, one burning thought: they fired me without knowing what they'd really done. I sat at my kitchen table, an old cup of coffee long gone cold beside my laptop. That merger contract I signed years ago, the one Julian from legal called about earlier, was open on my screen. At first glance it looked like legal gibberish, but line after line the words started clicking into place. 5 years ago, when Blake and Dorian, the design tech startup, was acquired by Valerie's family company Stonewell Atelier, I was the one who brokered the entire integration. I wasn't just involved, I was essential. And for my role, I was named co-director of intellectual property integration, a title that sounded ceremonial at the time, but it wasn't. Buried in a paragraph near the end, right beneath a clause about patent consolidation, was this: all future licensing, commercialization, or modification of design assets originating from the Blake and Dorian portfolio require co-director sign-off. That co-director was me. I leaned back slowly in my chair. The room felt like it was tilting sideways. They couldn't launch a single product from that portfolio without my approval. And that portfolio, it accounted for over 60% of Stonewell's revenue in the last 2 years. They'd just handed me a loaded weapon and didn't even realize it. I printed the contract and slipped it into a folder, then stared at the framed photo of Valerie and I from our 3rd anniversary. She had her head on my shoulder, her eyes bright. We looked like a team. Somewhere between that moment and yesterday's boardroom ambush, that team had fractured. Or maybe it had never really existed. I was just the guy who built the engine they now thought they could run without the mechanic. The next morning I made a call I hadn't thought I'd ever make again. I dialed Callum Mercer. Callum was a tenacious, slightly eccentric IP lawyer I'd met during a startup pitch event years back. He had a reputation for being ruthless with contracts and even more ruthless with people who tried to exploit them. We weren't exactly close, but we respected each other, and I knew he'd smell blood in this. "Alex Dorian," he answered, his tone curious. "Haven't heard from you in a while." To what do I owe the early morning suspense? I didn't waste time. "I need you to read a merger clause, and I need to know just how badly Stonewell screwed up." He laughed, a sharp, amused sound. "That's a sentence I haven't heard before breakfast in a long time. Send it over." 10 minutes later, my email pinged. Subject: "Oh, they're toast." Attached was a marked-up version of the clause I'd sent with Callum's comments in red. "Clause is enforceable, no expiration. You hold veto power on IP actions tied to this merger. In short, if they fired you without a release, they can't touch any of these products. They didn't just shoot themselves in the foot, they lit a match in a fireworks store." I read it 3 times just to be sure. Later that afternoon, I received a carefully worded email from Stonewell's interim legal lead, Madeline Cruz. It was titled "Clarification on Separation Agreement, Urgent." The body was laced with corporate niceties, but the panic bled through. They'd figured it out. They wanted a meeting, in person. I didn't reply right away. I went for a walk instead. My sneakers crunched over loose gravel as I made my way down to the marina where I used to go with Valerie before the chaos of power and profit clouded everything. We'd sit on the edge of the dock talking about dreams, design studios in Amsterdam, retreats in Kyoto, not billion-dollar expansions and firing each other over cappuccinos. Funny how time redefines love. I stood at the edge of the water for a long time, staring at the sky as it turned that bluish pink just before dusk. I didn't feel rage. I felt quiet, calm, in control. I wasn't going to burn Stonewell down. Not yet. I was going to make them watch as it slowly, irrevocably began to crumble without the one person who could have saved it. The next day I walked into the Stonewell offices like a ghost revisiting the world of the living. The receptionist blinked when she saw me. A few employees whispered, nudging each other, probably wondering what I was doing back. The conference room was already half full when I stepped in. Valerie sat at the head of the table, Bianca beside her. Madeline, the legal lead, was across from them, flanked by two board members who looked visibly uncomfortable. Valerie's eyes locked with mine for a split second. Something flickered there, maybe guilt, maybe fear, but she said nothing. I placed the folder on the table and opened it. I assume this is why you asked me here. Madeline cleared her throat. We were hoping to discuss the transition and any potential oversight in the initial termination process. Translation, they didn't realize firing me cut off their biggest income stream. Bianca, of course, leaned back, arms folded. We don't want this to turn litigious, Alex. I met her gaze. Neither do I. But I didn't turn this litigious. You did when you threw me out of the company I helped scale without reading the contract that kept you solvent. Silence. Valerie opened her mouth, then closed it. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than I expected. What do you want? It wasn't defiance. It was desperation dressed in diplomacy. I looked around the table. I want Stonewell to survive, but under new terms. I want a formal statement issued to stakeholders correcting the record that I wasn't let go due to performance. I want a seat on the board permanently, and I want full voting rights on any IP-related decisions moving forward. Madeline scribbled furiously. Valerie didn't look up. Bianca scoffed. You're asking for control. No, I said calmly. I'm asking for accountability. You can say no, but then I walk and I take your patents with me. I closed the folder and stood up. I'll give you until Friday. After that, the clause becomes public. And good luck explaining to your investors how the guy you fired owns the keys to your most valuable products. And I walked out. That night, I got a call from my brother Julian. He ran a boutique investment firm and had always been wary of my role in Valerie's company. I heard rumblings, he said. Stonewell's stock took a dip. Clients are spooked. What did you do? Nothing, I said. I just reminded them who built the damn thing. He whistled. You're not going back to them, are you? I looked out the window at the city lights. No, I said. I'm building something else. By the end of the week, the board voted to reinstate me as chief product advisor, reporting only to the board and independent from Valerie and Bianca's leadership. They issued a formal apology. Stakeholder letters went out. Press releases softened the edges of the scandal. But the damage was already done. Inside Stonewell, loyalty was shifting. Employees came to me quietly asking if I was leaving. Suppliers, clients, they wanted to know if I'd start something new, something clean, something real. And slowly the idea began to take root. Maybe the best revenge wasn't revenge at all. Maybe it was reinvention, a company without a compass. The days that followed were strange, not chaotic, not peaceful either. They were the kind of days where silence meant power was shifting. Behind the clean walls and curated branding of Stonewell Atelier, cracks were spreading like fault lines under pressure. And I wasn't doing a thing to stop them. They were doing it to themselves. Valerie didn't speak to me, not directly. We passed each other in the office like strangers with history written in invisible ink. She kept her head down, her tasks mechanical. I could see it in the way she gripped her coffee cup during morning briefs. The tension had settled into her bones. But she didn't apologize, and I didn't ask her to. Bianca, on the other hand, was furious in every room she entered. She argued with legal, snapped at junior managers, and more than once stormed out of meetings when things didn't go her way. I could almost hear her rage boiling beneath that polished exterior. How did he come back? But the answer was simple. I never left. The IP clause was just the beginning. The real power came when the staff started turning, quietly, subtly. I'd walk through the design floor and see people glance up, faces I'd mentored, names I remembered. They didn't say much, but their eyes asked questions. Are you really back? Can you fix this? I didn't answer, not with words, but I started making moves. I called a meeting with 3 department heads, Leo from industrial design, Mina from logistics, and Ruben from R&D. All 3 had worked beside me for years before Bianca froze them out and replaced their voices with yes men. We met off-site in a quiet co-working loft across town. No formality, no pretense, just 4 people who still gave a damn. I'm not here to stage a coup, I began, but I am here to build something better. Whether that happens here or somewhere else depends on what we do now. Leo leaned forward, always the realist. The board might have brought you back, but Valerie and Bianca still hold the steering wheel. Mina nodded, and they're headed straight for a cliff. Ruben said nothing. just opened a folder and pushed it toward me. Inside were timelines, charts, design, backlogs, canceled projects, the kind of chaos you couldn't fake. 6 months, he finally said. That's how long we've got before the patent pipeline dries up. I flipped through the pages, my jaw tightening. Without new launches, Stonewell's future was nothing but press releases and polite bankruptcy. They fired the guy who made sure the wheels kept turning, Mina added. They forgot what this place was really built on. I met her gaze. Then let's remind them. Word spread faster than I expected. I didn't promise promotions. I didn't wave around money. I just showed up on the floor in brainstorms, at prototype reviews, and listened. That was all it took. People were tired of the posturing, the panic-driven decisions from the top. They wanted clarity. They wanted stability. And for the first time in months, I could give them that, not as a boss, but as a builder. I spent late nights in the product lab sketching updates to an old model we shelved last year. Ruben brought in a new polymer supplier. Mina figured out a way to trim our shipping costs by 11%. Leo started mapping out a brand refresh, one that told the story of resilience, not just luxury. It wasn't Stonewell 2.0. It was something else. Something real. On the 6th night, Valerie showed up at the office well past closing. I was alone sorting through fabric samples for the new line. She didn't knock, just stood at the doorway, her shadow cast long across the carpet. "You're building something," she said quietly. I didn't look up. I always have been. She took a step forward. "Why not tell me? Why not include me?" I finally met her eyes. There was pain there, regret too, but also a kind of sadness you can't apologize away. "You had your chance," I said. "You chose Bianca. You chose silence." She sat down across from me, folding her hands. I didn't know what to do. Everything was changing so fast. You were working so much. We were barely even talking, and firing me was the answer. I thought it was temporary. I thought if we cleared space, you didn't clear space. I snapped. "You cleared me." Silence. Thick. Heavy. "I'm sorry, Alex." I nodded. But I didn't say it was okay, because it wasn't. 2 days later, Harper Investments pulled their funding from Stonewell. It wasn't public. But I heard it through the grapevine. They'd backed us for 3 years until they saw quarterly projections tanking and no leadership plan worth betting on. The board called an emergency session. Raphael, Valerie, and Bianca's father was back in town and furious. He stormed into the room, gray hair, slicked back, voice cutting through the room like thunder. "You gutted the company," he growled, slamming down the investor report. "You fired the one man who held this place together, and now you're surprised it's falling apart." Valerie didn't argue. Bianca tried. She always did. "This isn't about Alex, it's about optics. The market shifted. Supply chains collapsed. We couldn't predict that." "You couldn't predict loyalty," Raphael countered. "You couldn't see the value in someone who built this company from its bones." Then he turned to me. "You're not just the co-chair of IP, Alex. I'm offering you interim CEO." Gasps. Bianca stood up, rage in her eyes. "You can't." "I can," he said coldly. "The board already voted. And you're lucky we're not asking you to resign." Valerie didn't say anything. She didn't look surprised either. I looked around the table. The faces that once ignored me now watched in silence. I straightened my spine and nodded. "I'll do it, on one condition." Raphael raised a brow. "Go on." "We stop pretending Stonewell is just a luxury design firm. It's a human company, built by real people, for real people, and we rebuild it with values, not vanity." He smiled, spoken like the man I always trusted. That night I walked out of the office and looked up at the glass tower I helped raise from blueprints and dreams. I wasn't returning to what I had, I was reclaiming what I built, and next, I was going to transform it. Rebuilding the house they burned. There's a strange silence that comes with power, real power. Not the ceremonial kind with shiny titles or press releases, but the kind you can feel in the way people pause when you speak, the way decisions stick when you make them. I felt that silence on my first morning back as interim CEO. It wasn't applause, it wasn't congratulations. It was something more potent, expectation. I stepped into the executive floor, my floor now, and paused. The glass walls. The cold steel accents Bianca loved so much. The too bright art Valerie picked for every hallway. All of it looked expensive, soulless, like a shell that used to be alive. I nodded once, then walked into my new office and closed the door behind me, and started over. I began by calling a meeting not with the board, not with the C-suite, but with the floor teams, the people who'd stayed when things got ugly, the ones still answering client calls, still pushing through design fatigue, still believing something good might come from this. We gathered in the big conference room, about 30 of us, and for once there were no catered lunches, no corporate icebreakers, just coffee, chairs, and honesty. I stood in front of the whiteboard, sleeves rolled, tie loosened. I'm not going to stand here and pretend this is a comeback story, I began. This isn't about me getting revenge or reclaiming a title. It's about all of us rebuilding what they almost destroyed. Silence. A few nods. Ruben crossed his arms and gave me a rare smile. I pointed at the whiteboard. I want ideas, not survival tactics, not band-aids. I want solutions that make us proud again. Hands went up, slowly at first. Then all at once. Someone suggested reviving the Atelier Fellowship program we'd cut during budget freezes, a mentorship pipeline that once brought in some of our best young talent. Another pushed for restoring the prototype grants we used to give to cross-department projects. Then Leo stood and proposed we rebrand not just visually, but culturally. Let's stop selling exclusivity, he said. Let's sell vision. Let's sell truth. By the end of the hour, the whiteboard was covered in marker scrawls. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw something that mattered in this company again: hope. The next 2 weeks were a blur of movement. We didn't make flashy announcements or social media declarations. We rebuilt in silence, deliberate, intentional. I sat down with each department leader, some returning, some new. I didn't ask them what their goals were. I asked what they were afraid of. Most said the same thing. Being invisible again. I've watched people like Bianca build kingdoms on our backs, Mina told me in our one-on-one. I just want to work in a place where effort is seen. You will, I promised. I meant it. Meanwhile, the rest of the building was still reeling from the shakeup. Bianca had gone radio silent. Rumors swirled that she was negotiating a quiet exit. Valerie was different. She showed up every day, did her job as COO, stayed late reviewing operations reports. She never complained, never questioned my decisions, but she didn't smile either. She was still unraveling whatever part of herself had tied success to her sister's ambition. One afternoon, she knocked on my door. I motioned for her to enter. She stood by the bookshelf, not quite comfortable in the chair across from me. "You're rebuilding fast," she said. "We're rebuilding well." A pause. "Is there room for me in that?" I looked at her for a long time. "There's always room for people who are willing to start over the right way." She nodded, quietly, then turned to leave. She didn't ask to be forgiven, and I didn't offer it. But the foundation was starting to shift beneath us both. That weekend I stayed late again. I couldn't help it. The building was quiet, and I found myself in the archive room digging through old boxes we'd long since labeled outdated. I found the first blueprint I ever pitched Raphael, still creased and coffee-stained from nervous hands. I remembered the meeting, how he'd looked at me like I wasn't just an employee, but a builder, someone who understood more than revenue. And in that moment, I knew what we had to do next. I called Harper. "Let's design a legacy." She blinked. "What kind of legacy? One built on transparency, community, innovation, and humility. Something real." She was quiet for a beat. "I'm in." Monday morning, we launched what we called the Redesign Initiative. A public campaign, yes, but more than that, a movement inside the company. We published salaries. We restructured bonuses based on team achievements, not just top-down success. We opened up anonymous feedback lines and made monthly employee panels standard. Some rolled their eyes at first, but when their voices started turning into policies, they stopped doubting. Our tagline, "Rebuild with us," the media picked it up, fast. Not just because it was bold, but because it came from a company people had started to write off. A company that had lost its soul, and was clawing it back, one policy, one voice, one risk at a time. Valerie walked into my office the day we hit 500K shares on LinkedIn. She looked tired, but peaceful. "You're turning this place into something I never thought it could be," she said. "I'm not doing it alone," I replied. She gave me a small smile, and then she said the one thing I didn't expect. "Thank you for not shutting me out." I didn't say anything, just nodded. Because redemption doesn't come with fanfare. It comes in quiet moments like that. That night I stood alone in the top floor conference room looking out over the city skyline. Stonewell didn't belong to me. It never did. But the people, the purpose, the legacy, that was something I could finally say I helped build with calloused hands, sleepless nights, and the kind of leadership you can't fake. They fired me thinking it was the end, but they forgot who laid the first stone, and I was just getting started. When the earth trembles, you don't rebuild a house on scorched earth without first bracing for the aftershocks. I learned that the hard way. It happened on a Wednesday. Not that the day mattered, but I remember because it was the same morning we hit our first profit quarter since I came back. The kind of number that makes boardrooms cheer and investors breathe easier. But I didn't feel like celebrating. Because that morning a headline hit the newswire that knocked the wind out of me. Former COO files suit against Stonewell Innovations alleges unlawful termination and IP manipulation. Underneath it, Bianca's name in bold, her expression caught mid-scowl in a press photo I remembered from the company's last gala. Her legal team had filed a claim accusing me of freezing her out of the business she'd helped shape. It was predictable, it was bitter, it was war, and it was personal. The board called an emergency session. I didn't even sit down before the questions started. What does she have on us? Can we prove she had no standing? Is this going to tank our new investor round? I raised a hand. Slow down. I clicked the remote and pulled up the contract archive on the screen. Page 27, clause 9.3. The one that Bianca and Valerie had overlooked when they fired me months ago. This clause is why I was able to return. And it's also why she has no ground to stand on. She knowingly broke terms of a protected executive agreement. Valerie, sitting across from me, nodded slowly, her eyes clouded with guilt. She thought you wouldn't fight back. I glanced at her, then back to the board. She underestimated a lot more than that. But still, the lawsuit was a flare in the sky, a signal that we weren't out of the storm yet. That night, I found myself walking through the downtown courtyard behind our office building. It was quiet there. Safe. I sat on a bench near the fountain and let myself exhale. Bianca's lawsuit wasn't about money. It was about control. She had no intention of returning to the company. She just wanted to drag me through the mud on her way out. And worse, the press would feed on it. The same people who praised the redesign initiative were already publishing op-eds wondering if I'd overcorrected, if Stonewell was stable, if I was really a leader or just a man seeking vindication. I stared at my reflection in the water. For the first time in months, I wasn't sure. Back inside, I found Harper waiting outside my office. She looked more serious than usual. Mind if I come in? I motioned her inside. She stood arms crossed, watching me carefully. Is it true what the Times is saying? That she's claiming you manipulated the IP clause to get back in? I didn't answer right away. Just pulled open the drawer on my desk and tossed her the original 2018 contract still in its sleeve. The clause was there, plain as day. She skimmed it. Why didn't you bring this to the team sooner? Because I wanted to build trust, not win arguments. She softened. Her arms dropped to her sides. Alex, she said, you've built something amazing here, but people need transparency now more than ever. Don't go quiet. Don't play her game. I looked up at her. So what do I do? She smiled. You tell your story. The whole thing. In your words. Before she gets to write the ending. The next morning we launched something we never thought we would, a public letter from the CEO. Not corporate, not polished, just raw, honest, and signed by me. Months ago, I was removed from a company I helped build. I didn't fight back out of vengeance. I returned to rebuild not the brand, but the trust. And now someone who once sat at this table with me has chosen a path I wish she hadn't. This company belongs to its people, not power, not bloodlines, not ego. I welcome transparency, I welcome questions, because when you build something with integrity, you don't need to fear scrutiny. We posted it on our site, shared it to every social channel, and within hours it went viral. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was real. The backlash hit Bianca harder than we expected. Former employees came forward with stories how she bullied junior staff, how she pushed out anyone who didn't agree with her vision. A whistleblower even shared emails showing she'd tried to sell off core assets right before the leadership transition. The press turned. So did the court of public opinion. But even in victory, I didn't gloat. Because this wasn't a story about taking someone down. It was a story about lifting something up and holding it in the light no matter how many shadows tried to swallow it whole. That Friday, Valerie came into my office. No appointment, just a quiet knock and a look that said she hadn't slept much. She's withdrawing the lawsuit. I leaned back. Why? Valerie hesitated. She knows she lost. But more than that, she saw that no one stood behind her anymore. She stepped closer. Her voice shook. I know I stood beside her for too long. I believed in her. But I see it now. What we could have built if we'd done it right. I studied her face. Are you asking for forgiveness? No, she whispered. I'm asking for a second chance to get it right. I nodded, and for the first time really meant it. We ended the week by doing something symbolic. We took down the massive oil painting Bianca had commissioned for the lobby an abstract swirl of crimson and gold that had always felt more throne than artwork. In its place, we installed a mural designed by our junior team hands, building a foundation together. One stone at a time. Someone asked me what it meant. I smiled. It means we finally remembered where this company started and who it's for. And just like that, the tremor passed, but the foundation it held. The blueprint beyond the boardroom. Growth looks different when it's rooted in something real. That's what I kept telling myself in the weeks after Bianca withdrew her lawsuit and Valerie returned to the leadership table, this time with her sleeves rolled up and her ego left at the door. But while the fire had been put out inside the walls of Stonewell, something else had been ignited in me. A question that kept tugging at the edge of every meeting, every success metric, every shareholder call. What if we built something that wasn't just for us? It started small. One morning I was standing near the break room when I overheard Mia, one of our interns, talking on the phone. Her voice was hushed, tense. "I can't afford that right now, Mom. No, I'm eating fine. Just don't worry about me, okay?" She didn't see me. I didn't want her to. But I saw myself in her. The younger version before Stonewell, before the boardrooms, back when I scraped together rent and lived on microwaved noodles and overworked dreams. That afternoon, I sent a quiet email to HR. Asked about starting a discretionary fund, something simple, flexible, no red tape. A way to quietly help those who needed it. By Friday, we had it live. Anonymous requests, confidential approvals. We called it the Bridge Program, because sometimes people just need a bridge. Word got around fast, not because we announced it, but because people talk when they feel seen. And the feeling spread. Harper came to me a week later holding a folder full of proposals. "I think we're onto something," she said. "What if we did this bigger?" "What do you mean?" "I mean community outreach. I mean scholarships, workshops, partnering with trade schools, building a pipeline that doesn't care about legacy or LinkedIn connections, just grit and potential." She paused. "You said this company was for the people who build it. Let's prove it." I looked at the folder, thick with ideas, with stories, with names. "Let's do it," I said. The initiative launched a month later under a new division, Stonewell Forward. It wasn't a PR stunt. It was personal. We held workshops in underserved schools, sent our design leads into community colleges to mentor rising talent, opened our doors for open source innovation days, and we hired, not just interns or assistants, but engineers, strategists, creatives, people who'd never had a shot until someone gave them one. Valerie helped lead the charge. Her background in operations was invaluable, but more importantly, her presence sent a message: this company wasn't just rebuilding, it was transforming. One day, she and I stood on the rooftop after a long planning session. She looked out at the city and said, "I used to think leadership was about being the loudest voice in the room." I waited. "But you showed me it's about listening, really listening." I nodded. Leadership is quieter than people think. That fall, we hosted our first Stonewell Demo Day, not for investors, but for the public. We invited families, students, local nonprofits. The lobby turned into an exhibit hall, conference rooms into workshops, our employees into mentors. I stood near the entrance watching a kid no older than 10 try out one of our prototype tools with a kind of focus I hadn't seen in years. His mom looked on, tears in her eyes. "He's never been this curious," she whispered. "Never believed he was smart enough to do this kind of thing." I bent down, met his eyes. "You're more than smart enough, buddy. And if you ever want to come build something with us, we'll be right here." He grinned. His mom smiled. And for a moment, the world felt right. That night, after the guests had left and the floors had been swept, I sat in my office alone, lights dim, the city pulsing outside my window. I pulled out the old, crinkled photo I kept in my desk, the one from the early days. Me, Valerie, Bianca, and the late founder, her father. Back when everything was raw and hopeful. A lot had changed. Some of it broke me. Some of it built me. But this was different. This was healing. This was building something beyond the boardroom. A few days later, I received a letter, handwritten, no return address. But I recognized the handwriting immediately. Bianca. I hesitated before opening it, then read, "Alex. I won't ask you to forgive me, but I saw the demo day photos. I heard about the scholarships. I've spoken with people you hired who never thought they'd get a chance. I guess I forgot what this company was supposed to be. You didn't. Keep going. B." I sat back. No closure, no clean ending. But maybe that's what growth really looks like. Not winning, not even rebuilding, just remembering who you are and choosing to become it again. It was almost midnight when Alex found Valerie on the rooftop of the Stonewell office. The lights of the city stretched below like veins of molten gold, and above them stars blinked behind soft winter clouds. She sat cross-legged on an old bench near the edge, coat pulled tight, a thermos cradled in her hands. When he stepped into the chill, she didn't look surprised like she'd been expecting him all along. "Chamomile," she said softly, lifting the thermos. "Want some?" He took a seat beside her, nodding. Steam rose as she poured the tea into a paper cup, handing it to him wordlessly. They sat like that for a while, not talking. The wind teased the collar of his coat. Below the building that had nearly become a battlefield just months ago, now pulsed gently with the light of people working late, some by choice, some by fire, renewed. Finally, she broke the silence. "I didn't speak up that day," she said. "You don't have to say it." "I know." Alex didn't interrupt. I was scared, she admitted, eyes still fixed on the skyline. Bianca was relentless, and I thought, if I stayed quiet, maybe I'd survive the storm. I didn't realize silence could be a choice, too, a loud one. He took a sip of tea. It tasted like flowers and truth. Not sweet, but warm. "I was angry," he said finally. "Not just at Bianca, at you too, because I trusted you the most." Valerie nodded slowly, eyes brimming. "And yet," he added, turning to her, "you showed up. You didn't run. You're here now." She let out a breath. "I want to be more than who I was that day." Alex nodded. "We both do." They stayed there watching the city breathe. Below them, Stonewell had started to change, not just in structure, but in spirit. The Stonewell Forward initiative wasn't just a PR move. It was Alex's answer to the question that had haunted him since the day he was fired. What do I want to leave behind if not revenge? He had sat for hours, weeks, even sketching out the blueprint not of an expansion plan or a new product line, but of a company culture built on conscience. He wrote it out in full, every principle, every promise. He called it Beyond the Boardroom. It started simple. We do not build to impress. We build to include. We do not grow to compete. We grow to contribute. Leadership is not control. It's accountability. And it wasn't just words. They began offering career track internships to single parents, scholarships for first-generation college students, and therapy stipends for overworked staff. For every product launch, a portion of proceeds would go to community programs the employees voted on. They built a library in a low-income school where one of their janitors used to teach before fleeing conflict in his home country. They hired back a former receptionist, now a mother of 3, as operations lead in the nonprofit arm. The walls of Stonewell had once held ambition. Now they held intention. And Valerie. She didn't just re-earn her place. She redefined it. She proposed a mentorship initiative for young women in tech. Pitched it, built it, launched it. She called it Project Echo because she said every voice should leave a trace, especially the ones still finding their volume. One night, months later, she left a handwritten note on Alex's desk. No email, no Slack message. Just this: "Thank you for making space for me to come back. Not as a partner, but as the person I should have been all along. V." Alex kept that note. Tucked it inside the same notebook where he'd once written his resignation speech, the one he never delivered because fate had other plans. That night on the rooftop, Valerie turned to him and asked, "Do you ever wish we could go back?" He shook his head slowly. "No, not after what we've built forward." She smiled faintly. "Beyond the boardroom." He looked at her and the city and the sky and nodded. Exactly. The envelope came on a Tuesday, plain white with Alex's name written in blue ink. No return address, no logo, just the kind of letter that feels like it holds something heavy, like a truth that's waited too long to be spoken. It was from Rachel, his cousin, the one who'd grown up on the other side of the city in a house where the water sometimes ran cold and dinner sometimes didn't come. The one who used to sleep in his family's basement on weekends when things got too loud at home. She had written, "I heard what happened, saw the article about the company. I know it must have hurt. But I'm writing to thank you, not because you built Stonewell, but because you built me. Remember that summer I stayed with you? You let me sit in your office and play with the old whiteboard markers while you practiced investor pitches. You told me I was smart before anyone else ever did." Alex leaned against the edge of his desk, reading the letter twice, maybe 3 times. His hand tightened slightly on the paper as he reached the final lines. "I'm finishing my MBA now. Got a full ride. I never forgot those afternoons in your garage. I wanted you to know what you gave me. It worked." He folded the letter slowly. carefully, like it was something sacred. And in that quiet moment, no noise, no deadlines, no fires to put out, he finally allowed himself to ask the question that had been quietly blooming inside him. What if Stonewell isn't my only legacy? What if my real impact was never in the boardroom at all? That night he didn't sleep. He stayed up sketching names and structures, pulling from memories from the people who had shaped him, from the ones he had once quietly mentored without even knowing. By sunrise he had a name: the Foundry Project. It would be more than a charity, more than a brand. It would be a forge where talent often overlooked would find fire and form, where kids like Rachel, too smart for their zip codes and too quiet for their teachers, could be seen, could be built. The mission was simple: scholarships for first-generation college students, workshops on entrepreneurship in underfunded high schools, microgrants to help single parents finish their education or launch side businesses, mentorship programs pairing retired executives with ambitious youth. He launched it quietly, no gala, no ribbon cutting, no self-congratulations. Just a website with 3 words on the landing page: everyone starts somewhere. Within weeks, applications flooded in, not just from students but from mentors, former colleagues, quiet supporters, even ex-competitors. People who had once watched him get shoved out of the company he helped build now came forward, offering time, funding, and letters of support. Rachel became the first ambassador. She spoke at a local university on behalf of the Foundry Project, telling her story. Her voice trembled at first, but then it soared. "I'm not here today because someone gave me power. I'm here because someone believed I already had it and helped me learn how to use it." In the audience that day, Alex sat in the back row. He didn't wear a suit. He didn't ask for recognition. He just listened, and for once allowed himself to feel proud without the guilt that had chased him for months. That night when he got home, he placed Rachel's original letter in a frame, hung it right above the desk where he used to work on quarterly projections and growth models. Now it reminded him of something deeper: companies can fall, brands can be bought, but the people you lift stay lifted. And when he looked at it, he no longer saw failure. He saw fire. He saw future. He saw that even when others try to erase your name from the company you built, your real legacy might already be written in someone else's handwriting. They forgot who built it first. The boardroom was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes before chaos, but the kind that comes after a storm has cleared and left the air thick with realization. Alex stood at the end of the table, looking not at the PowerPoint on the screen, but at the people seated before him. Former skeptics, former doubters, the same board members who once watched silently as Evie and Caroline forced him out with thin smiles and colder hearts. Now their eyes were different, not just curious, respectful, grateful. The new Stonewell report had just dropped quarterly numbers that exceeded expectations by 18%, a client retention rate that was back in the 90s, and employee turnover reduced by half. But more than numbers, there was clarity in the culture, structure, vision, and behind it all was him, not Alex the husband, not Alex the brother-in-law, but Alex Donovan, the builder. The voice of the chairman broke the silence. "We've reviewed the legacy clause and the new merit-based structure. The foundation partnerships are a bold move, but the feedback from partners and press is stellar. You've not only stabilized the company, Alex, you've given it something it never had: a soul." Alex didn't smile. He just nodded once. It wasn't about validation. It was about arriving on his own terms. Evie hadn't returned to the company. After the vote that stripped her of operational power, she'd resigned, choosing silence over confrontation. Caroline had tried to stay, resisting the tide, but eventually stepped back into a non-executive role, her pride too dented to face the daily reminders of their failure. And yet Alex hadn't burned their names from the records. He didn't need to. Their legacy would live as caution. His would live as correction. After the meeting, as the others filed out, Raphael lingered. His hair was more silver now, his movement slower, but his eyes carried a look of something between apology and admiration. "You did more than prove a point," he said. "You rebuilt the thing I once thought I handed over wisely. Maybe I should have handed it to you from the start." Alex looked out the window. Sunlight pooled onto the city skyline. He could see the Foundry Project's name now etched on the building across the street, a partnership hub that served as both incubator and resource center. It was growing faster than they anticipated. "It's not about who gets handed what," Alex said quietly. "It's about who doesn't let go when it matters." Raphael nodded. "And who knows what to hold on to, and what to release." They shook hands this time, not as family, not even as colleagues, but as two men who finally understood where their lines had diverged and why they needed to. That night, Alex drove home with the windows down. No music, just wind and memory. The house felt less like a memory now and more like a base, a place not haunted by betrayal but filled with new purpose. On his desk sat two objects, the framed letter from Rachel and a worn brass key. The key to the first Stonewell office, the original co-working space he'd built with his bare hands when he was 25. The place where he worked nights to fix a printer and days to pitch investors who barely looked up from their coffee. It had no real use now, but it meant everything. He held it for a moment, then walked out to the garage. The shelves were dusty, the tools long untouched. And there, behind a row of paint cans and moving boxes, sat the old wooden sign that once hung outside the original office. It simply read, "Stonewell Solutions, built to last." He leaned it against the wall and smiled, not out of pride, but out of peace. Because now he knew no matter how far you're pushed out, no matter who tries to rewrite the story, the builder always remembers the blueprint. And sometimes that's all you need to start again.